Now to the Intergenerational Report that has been released today by the Treasurer. The report, which is released every few years, offers a snapshot of Australia as it is expected to turn out over the next 40 years, and it has certainly provided some interesting insights. Joining me to get the latest on its findings is contributing economics editor at The Australian, Judith Sloan. Judith, welcome to the program. I'd like to start with superannuation. There are concerns about Australia's ageing population, and there are concerns expressed even from the man who came up with the concept of superannuation of how it is being run. Former Prime Minister Paul Keating says super should invest in fixed income financial instruments, that is debt, instead of equities to provide more stable cash flow for people as they go into retirement. Judith, I'm interested in your thoughts.
Well, I think that actually sounds quite sensible, and bear in mind that Paul Keating's not entirely sensible on superannuation matters. But superannuation, the system as it's developed, has very much focused on what we call the accumulation side when people are still working. It's really quite badly designed for when people retire and need a sort of pension-like annuity. And that's when you want to change the asset allocation to be not so risky and growth focused, but to ensure people have enough money in their old age. So I think he's got a point. But I think, the IGR, let me take it more broadly, is covering so many topics, it actually ends up covering them all very badly.
That's an interesting overall assessment. My concern about the superannuation proposal is that these are ultimately decisions that individuals should be taking about what to do with their nest egg. It's not really something that the government should be telling you what to do with your money at the time that after your entire working career of them telling you what you can do with it, you were supposed to be able to have some say of your own. It doesn't start to become the government getting their hand in that part of life as well.
Oh, yes, and be very careful. I totally agree with that. That this could end up being a sort of what I call an additional tax take, because there's this sort of conversation that goes on with, older people aren't spending all their superannuation. Now, that's not entirely surprising because actually you and I don't know precisely when we're going to die. So, we have to be quite risk averse in how we handle our finances. But here's another point. I mean, if people actually want to leave some of their money to their children, well, that's a legitimate objective as well. So it's this sort of freedom sapping thinking, which is that, the government must direct these, well, I mean, it's been compulsory savings and then now they want to enforce how it's spent. So one minute we're told we're under-saving and therefore we have to have a compulsory savings scheme. And then when you retire, they'll have a compulsory spending scheme as long as they can nominate what you spend your money on. So I think there's a lot of sort of contradictions in the scheme.
There's an alarming forecast from the report saying that Australia's population will grow by around 50% in the next 40 years, so that Australia will have over 40 million people. Meanwhile, we've got a shocking infrastructure deficit and a cost of living problem. How is this going to work out in the absence of serious government reform?
Well, I think this is one of the cases in the report where the tail has wagged the dog. So it's worth going back to 2002. So that was the first IGR under Peter Costello. That was the best IGR, by the way. And they predicted at that point that we would have a population of 25 million in 2042. Well, we had a population of 25 million in 2018. And that was all because they ramped up the migration intake. Now, with this IGR, they're in a spot of bother. First of all, they don't want to cap the tax take like we were talking before. So previous IGRs have had a cap on how much tax will be taken out of the economy, not in this one. And secondly, instead of the population growing by 0.8% per year, which is extremely high by international standards, they've modelled 1.1%. Now, that may not sound like a huge difference, but it actually is a huge difference, and it's going to be based on this ramping up of migration. And this is, I know you've had Leith Van Onselen on, and but I also contribute to this debate, that I don't think the population, that the existing residents, have really ever consented to this policy approach, which actually involves, 400,000 migrants are coming in this financial year. It's absolutely extraordinary. So, this is sort of the size of Canberra. And somehow this is seen as a solution to our economic problems. But here's the thing, Amanda, they don't actually model the costs of all the additional infrastructure and services that those migrants will require. So I think that is another fault of this report.
There's a real absence of forward thinking and challenging reform being put on the table by Labor. Tax reform is not on the agenda, according to the report. Measures to encourage Australians to increase the birth rate aren't on the table. Measures to improve productivity aren't on the table. I could keep going. And all we're getting from Labor is already announced minor changes to super tax breaks, the tobacco excise and the petroleum resources rent tax. Stage 3's tax cuts are supposed to stay, but ultimately this really suggests a government that is unprepared to do what's needed to grow the pie. And what's left? Well, they've got to come for us for more taxes, haven't they?
Well, yes, I thought that was hilarious, Jim, telling us those 3 points were his tax reform package, because they're all pretty trivial, PRT, excise on cigarettes, and I can't even remember the other one. So they're not tax reform. But look, I think, here's the big question I think that the viewing audience should think about. This is fundamentally a question of, is Australia a good place to invest in? Because the investment rates have fallen dramatically. And if it's not a good place to invest, why is that so? And then you start listing the components of the impediments to investment, and that's where government policy should be focusing.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Judith Sloan, thank you very much for your contribution tonight.